Pronto, Paulo?
Yes, I will begin waiting.
Posso começar? Não entendi.
Are we on?
We are on. Okay, so we'll start.
Wait.
Good.
Okay.
All right. Boa tarde a todos. É com grande prazer que abrimos o primeiro ciclo de webinars da Aucani-Idiomas, que fazem parte de um projeto de internacionalização em casa, e o qual tem o objetivo de aprimorar a comunicação acadêmica em língua inglesa. Agradeço a presença de todos os que se inscreveram nos webinars e os que acompanharão através do YouTube. I will switch into English now then. So I am Lauri Zarra, Associate Director of USP International Cooperation Office, and I am also in charge of the project Internationalization at Home. I would like to thank a lot the Embassy of the United States in the name of Jennifer Euler, the General Consulate in São Paulo in the name of Marco Sirata, Madelina Young-Smith from the Cultural Affairs Office representing the U.S. Mission and here with us today. Thank you, Madelina. And as well as Professor Valmor Tricoli, President of USP International Cooperation Office, who always supports our actions. And last but not least, my colleague, Professor Luciana Carvalho, the Pedagogical Coordinator of Aucani-Idiomas, who was responsible for the successful proposal submitted to the Virtual English Language Specialist Program of the Department of State. I also thank and heartily welcome the specialist Professor Jamila Barton, who will give the 5 open webinars to the whole USP community and even beyond, because it is on the web, and which will be followed by 5 workshops for students and staff who will be responsible for multiplying the results of all these webinars and workshops. So now I kindly ask Madelina Young-Smith to say some words, who will be followed by Professor Valmor Tricoli. Please come, Madelina.
Thank you very much, Professor Laura. Thank you all so much for being here today. We are really, really honored to be in your presence. I understand that there are hundreds of teachers viewing right now, so I just want to, I'm really excited and really thankful for this time. I would like to echo Professor Laura's thanks to Professor for putting together this amazing English language specialist proposal. Professor Valmor, you have shown, you've demonstrated that we can continue on in these virtual times, and we're really thankful for it. Thanking Professor Luciana Carvalho very much for all of your hard work in putting together these workshops and seminars. It's really, really outstanding work. And I'd like to welcome Jamila Barton for accepting this partnership with us to engage with USP Aucani in this initiative for USP teachers, English is a really, really high priority for the U.S. mission, and it's really, really important, especially in these times of coronavirus, to acknowledge that English not only brings us together culturally, but it really does provide and equip our next generation of leaders with impeccable transferable tools that will allow them to grow not only in Brazil, not only in the United States, but grow as world leaders. So I wanted to take this time to really thank all of the teachers who are on, who have decided to commit their lives to teaching. And for all of those parents out there, I'm one of them. I have two young students, or 2 young children at home. And I am eternally grateful and have even more respect for all of the work that you do. You come to the job with creativity, energy, and drive and passion. And in these times, the world is really recognizing your extraordinary value. I come also with an invitation. Today, we are observing our U.S. Independence Day, 244 years since independence. So happy 4th of July to you on behalf of the U.S. mission. I'd like to invite you all to our 4th of July Independence Party tomorrow at 4 p.m. On our social media pages or sites. You can visit us at Consulado EUASP. It would be great to virtually see all of you there. And I would be remiss to share with you that we all have amazing resources in the form of English language specialists. Thank you again, Jamila. We also have a number of other resources available to you through the Regional English Language Office. I hope that all of you have pen and paper today. I would like you to take down this very important email to request access to those resources. It's RELO, R-E-L-O, Brazil, B-R-A-Z-I-L, at state.gov. And also I encourage you all to visit the RELO's Facebook site, again, RELO Brazil. With that, thank you all so much again for your time and your commitment and your passion. And I wish you the very best in this workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Madelina. Professor Valmore, please. Your micro, you have to put down there. Yes.
Okay. I just heard that we have around 600 people connected. It's kind of good news, but at the same time, it's a little bit intimidating. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you, Professor Laura, for the introduction. I gotta say that beforehand, I'm going to apologize because if I make some language mistakes, what is quite embarrassing in front of this specific audience today. After all, everybody but myself, I'm not an expert in English, but I try to do my best not to sound so weird. Then I decided to take some notes here. If I pronounce your name in a kind of weird way, I apologize again. I want to thank the Cultural Affairs Officer, Madelina, and also Professor Jamila for their time and effort. We really appreciate your contribution. I'm not gonna take a lot of your time because I know that everybody is anxious to start this webinar series, but I'd like to say some few words. I have to say that I'm pretty happy with this webinar series, which are the result of this extensive cooperation between USP International Office, specifically Aucani-USP, our Faculdade de Filosofia, Letras e Ciências Humanas, the Departamento de Línguas Modernas, Programa de Pós-Graduação de Estudos Linguísticos e Literários em Inglês, a nossa Escola de Artes, Ciências e Humanidades, and of course, the full support of the U.S. Embassy and the Regional English Language Office, and maybe I don't know, if I forgot somebody, I'm sorry, but it's a lot of names and people involved. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time that this kind of program is organized at our university. And I guess Madelina was really comprehensive when she said that English is basically a universal academic language. So teaching and learning academic English is a fundamental part of our internationalization plan, our internationalization program. And I hope, actually I'm sure that all of you are going to learn a lot from Professor Jamila and our Aucani-Idiomas team. Once again, I want to thank the U.S. Embassy, the RELO, the Regional English Language Office, Madelina, Professor Jamila, and I have a special thanks here for Professor Laura and Professor Luciana Carvalho. I know that both of you worked really hard to put all these webinar series together. And finally, I would like to thank Sandra, Júlia Sardinha, Paulo Jordão, and John Carvalho for their really competent support, because without you, this whole webinar stuff, how can I say, this technological stuff is not going to work without your support. Thank you very much, and good work for everyone.
Thank you, Valmor. And now I give the floor. The floor is yours, Luciana, please. So you will introduce Jamila and also give the logistics of how it will work on the webinars. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Laura. Thank you to the Cultural Affairs Officer of the U.S. Mission, Madalena Young-Smith, and Professor Valmor Tricoli for the kind words and for being here today, especially to Madalena, because it's the 4th of July holiday celebrations, as she has just said. We will put down the emails that Madalena has said on the webinar on YouTube on the chat. So don't worry about that. We'll write them down. And as you all have heard, the Virtual English Language Specialist Program is yet another program of the Department of State, of which the University of São Paulo is participating, thanks to the support of the Regional English Language Office. So I would like to give special thanks to Jennifer Uller and Marco Zirata, with whom Aucani-USP has been working very closely. I will now introduce our speaker for this afternoon, Jamila Barton. Hello and welcome. She has over 19 years of experience teaching English to speakers of other languages and 5 years experience with English language teacher development. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology and English from Tulane University, a CELTA RSA certificate, and an MA in TESOL from Seattle Pacific University. She was an ESL faculty in the Seattle Colleges District for 14 years and an English language fellow at the University of Jordan and Queen Rania Teachers Academy in Amman for 2 years. Currently, she is a doctoral candidate in applied linguistics, ESL, at Georgia State University, where she teaches multilingual composition, TEFL, and international teaching assistance courses. She also teaches English for art and design purposes at Savannah College of Art and Design, and her current research interests include academic literacy, data-driven learning, and English language teacher development. So Jamila will be sharing all her specialties with us throughout the month of July. And just before I give the floor to Jamila, I would like to inform the audience that if you require a certificate of attendance, a link will be available on YouTube during the talk. All you have to do is click on the link. You can also make questions via chat, and questions can be made in English and Portuguese. We have 940 people watching us now, and people from all over the USP community and from many courses. So we have people in languages, in psychology, in medicine, in architecture. We have students from all courses, which is fabulous. Thank you all for being here and attending. And now, without further ado, Jamila, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Okay, just give me a second to turn on my screen here for you. And there we go. Okay. So, hey, everybody. I was not expecting to be talking to so many people, but I'm really excited. And I am really excited about talking about second language writing because it's really been my favorite thing to teach for over 20 years. And also it's what I'm doing my PhD in. So it's something that is near and dear to my heart. So today, I really want to kick off this series with looking at some of the main theoretical approaches that have shaped the field of second language writing, and also discuss some of the advantages and disadvantages for teaching and learning writing in academic settings, especially for second language writers. So that is kind of what we'll be talking about. And I'm going to be using poll everywhere, but I think, what happened here? Oh, yeah, that's right. So I'm going to be using poll everywhere, but I'm not sure if it will handle 900 people logging in. But what would be really helpful is if you'd like to actually post your answer to these questions, you can go to pollev.com and then put in my name, Jamila Barton, and I think it's 197. And then you can answer the question here. So the question is, which of these describes your beliefs about teaching second language writing? And you have 3 sentences here. The first one is, second language writers learn by analyzing essays and writing from models. Second language writers learn through free writing, drafting, and revision. And second language writers learn by studying genres in their academic disciplines. Now, obviously, you might believe more than one of these things, but just go ahead and give us an idea of what you would think right now. And if anybody's using the chat window, that's fine too. So Luciana, do we have any answers that we want to share?
They're coming up. People are saying that number 1, lots of number 1s. Number 2 a lot as well. We have all, yeah, see?
Okay, so it looks like a lot of you are sort of choosing that second language writers learn through free writing, drafting, and revision. Well, if you said that, then you probably come from a particular approach called cognitivist process approach, and we'll talk about that a little later and what that means. But I wanted you to think about your own beliefs first before we start talking about the approaches, so that you'll have some context for when we start talking about the approaches. So let's go on. Oh, let me see if I can get this to the next screen here. Okay, so in this webinar, we'll first look at some challenges that second language writers face. And then after, we'll look at 3 of the most common approaches to teaching and learning writing, and then discuss some of the underlying beliefs. And I'll also show you some types of classroom activities that you might use if this is your own personal lens for teaching second language writing. So I have a quote here, and this is just to talk about why it's so important to understand philosophies of teaching, and because it improves our methods. So this quote is from Rhymes, and it says, "Teachers must consequently consider a variety of approaches, their underlying assumptions, and the practices that each philosophy generates." So that's our lens today. And I actually come from a more eclectic approach. So I actually borrow from all of these depending on the context. So I'm not going to tell you that there is one right answer here. I'm going to just kind of give you some things to think about for all of these. Research has shown that teachers mainly are influenced by their personal beliefs when it comes to language teaching, and also about how their own experiences with writing themselves. And the other things that teachers are really influenced by is the theories and the teaching methods that they know, and also practical constraints within the teaching context. So obviously, even if we really want to do a lot of composing processes, we might not have the class time, or it might not be a part of the curriculum, or we might not have access to materials for that. So just to kind of think about what influences you when you decide what to teach. Teachers working with second language writers face quite different challenges than L1 writing instructors. That's because second language writing is influenced by a number of factors that L1 writers are not influenced by. For example, research suggests that second language writers transfer writing strategies from their L1. That means that second language writing is influenced by the writer's education and the writing skills they have in their native language. Also, second language writers are constrained by the languages they know and by the language that they know in that language that they're trying to write. That means that writing teachers have to teach language as well as writing skills. And so it also means that students and sometimes teachers tend to focus more on the language skills than the writing skills. So they might avoid talking about audience and purpose and genre and coherence and cohesion in favor for grammar, word choice, and mechanics. Finally, all students the way that students receive second language writing success is really influenced by student motivation and other cognitive and affective factors. Specifically, second language writing teachers have to be prepared to address the following issues. They really need to be prepared to address lack of knowledge about language and content. They need to be prepared to look at linguistic structures and cohesion devices and address misuse of those things. And they also need to address lack of knowledge about cultural issues, disciplinary content issues, rhetorical practices. And specifically, if you're teaching in academic settings, there's a number of Western practices for developing an argument, for textual borrowing, and reader expectations that are very unique and very culturally specific for academia. So I have another question here. And the question is, what challenges do your second language writers face? So the students in your class, what challenges do they face? And we'll take a minute and let you answer that. So someone said two, just two challenges, maybe.
Two is a favorite.
Ah, okay. So we're looking at what challenges from the previous slide. Ah, yes. Avoiding repetition can be really difficult, especially for students who do not have enough vocabulary to come up with synonyms. Sure, fluency is a big issue. So being able to write fluently can be a difference. A lot of people are saying vocabulary. I can see vocabulary coming up a lot. Good. And yeah, vocabulary must be a huge issue, especially in academic settings. I can see that. And then also language expertise and knowledge about the topic. Okay, good. So we're gonna, they think in Portuguese and write in English. That's a huge problem as well. And I think we'll take couple more comments as we think here. Word choice, very good. Okay, let's go on. So let's talk a little bit about the three main approaches that I'm going to discuss today in second language writing. But before we do that, I'll give you a little bit of history. So actually, the field of second language writing is quite new. It's really 1980s, whereas the field of first language writing is older. It's early 19th century is when we really started looking at this. So the field of second language writing research has really been influenced by first language rhetoric and composition studies and applied linguistics. And first language composition studies began in the early 19th century from first year writing courses at Harvard University. And it was really professionally driven by the National Council of Teaching English and the Conference on College Composition and Communication. But it's mainly coming from the tradition of oral argument that was outlined in Greece in the 500 BCE by Aristotle. And he was very concerned with logic and rhetorical patterns or modes for description, narration, and argument. The second influence of second language writing is from applied linguistics, which actually began more just before World War II, out of a need for foreign language instruction. And obviously, one of the main organizations that has professionally driven the language skills needed for writing is TESOL. Each of the approaches to language writing, second language writing, focus heavily on literary analysis of argument and logic. and school-based rhetoric modes, right? So if you come from a product-oriented approach, then you would be very interested in literary analysis of argument and school-based rhetorical modes like argument and narration and description. After the 1960s, there was a really big backlash against product approaches because teachers felt like they were focusing so much on the end product and not enough on the process. So that started with process-oriented approaches, where teachers wanted students to focus more on individual writing development and composing processes like pre-writing and drafting and expressive writing like journalism. So many teachers in the 1980s felt the process approach did not actually prepare writers to write in specific academic contexts like engineering and science. So post-process approaches focus very heavily on writing as a social process. And if you're teaching from this approach, you might be using collaborative writing and genre analysis, or even critical literacy activities in your classroom. So in the next section, I'd like to look at each approach to teaching second language writing more clearly. And let's go to the next thing. Oh, sorry, I went backwards. There we go. So considering your own experience learning language as second language writing, which approach did your teacher use most often? So was it more of a product-oriented approach? Was it more of a process-oriented approach, or was it more of a post-process approach? And it may be true that you're not sure just yet, because we haven't talked a lot about the processes yet. Oh, a lot of you are saying product-oriented approaches. Some of you have more of a post-process approach. So it looks like maybe a lot of you were taught the 5-paragraph essay in a product-oriented approach, and you read literature and you analyzed it, and then you wrote a 5-paragraph essay with an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Yeah, that's actually a very common approach in academic settings. So I'm not surprised that that's the case. Okay, let's talk more about a product-oriented approach. So let's talk about this product-oriented approach. In second language writing, we call it traditional L2 rhetoric. That's the name of the approach in our field. And you can often find teaching methods from this approach in EAP and multilingual college composition classes. Teachers from this orientation believe that writing is a tool for language learning and assessment. And they believe that students learn when they're looking at literature or set models and copying those models to improve their writing skills. The main criticism of this approach is that it doesn't really contribute to overall writing proficiency and fluency because you're just focusing on one product. And then also there really isn't any preparation for writing for specific disciplines or writing professionally. And there isn't any focus on social and communicative practices of writing. Let's look at an example of an activity that one might do. This is actually from Read, Write, Think. It's a very good website that actually has a lot of product and process-oriented activities, if those are things you're interested in. And if you look here, this is an essay map. And basically what you're asking the students to do is to write notes about what they plan to say for their introduction, for their body, and for the conclusion before they write. So this is that idea of modeling and outlining before you write the product that you're supposed to write, right? There's a lot of prescribed formula writing in a traditional L2 rhetoric approach, and a lot of sentence drills. So focusing very specifically on combining sentences and putting things together structurally. Okay, let's take another activity or another question. How would you use a traditional second language rhetoric approach to teach second language writing? Waiting for some answers. Is there any answers from the chat window while we're waiting for some answers from Poll ED?
We have a small delay.
Oh, do we?
With the response, yeah. I think they're probably coming in. Let me just see.
Oh, here we go. So teaching grammar through writing would be a good way to use a second language rhetoric approach. Showing modeling for students is actually a very good, helpful task, right? Someone said, good question. So you might need a little more time to think about it. Practicing combining sentences, showing a model text and highlighting useful phrases, good. And then also maybe comparing. So this person is saying maybe comparing first language and second language rhetoric for intercultural conversation. And then also helping to introduce writing. So great, thanks for your answers. Let's go on to the next approach here. And this is, we're going into process-oriented approaches. And the first one I want to talk about is actually expressivism. So like I told you, a lot of teachers felt that the product-oriented approach did not help students focus on writing fluency and the process of writing. So what teachers started doing in the 1970s and 80s is they started using expressive writing in tasks instead of modeling and writing prescribed essays. And they did this because they wanted students to use writing for self-discovery and also develop sort of their own voice or identity as a writer. And one of the focuses of expressive writing is really critical thinking and also voice. So if those are things that you're interested in, expressive writing approaches really have a lot to say about that. And one of the contributions of expressivism is that free writing has been proven to improve global writing fluency, and it really improves student motivation. So if you have students that are very uninterested in writing, expressive writing activities might really help them get into it, right? One of the problems with expressivism, however, is that a lot of teachers felt that they don't really prepare students for disciplinary and non-academic writing. And there isn't as much focus on language because the teacher is acting more of a guide than actually giving instruction. And there's another criticism of this approach from like critical literacy theories is that, you know, voice is kind of a cultural construct and it might not be as useful for second language writers. So that's kind of what people would say about expressivism. Let's look at an activity. So there's lots of activities that you can do with expressivist activities. You can do free writing on any topic that the student is interested in. You can guide students through individual and group writing conferences. You can assign journaling and personal essays. So these are all things that are really helpful for expressive writing. Another process approach that I want to look at is called cognitivism. And this is actually probably will be very familiar to you because we use composing processes so often in teaching second language writing now. And that actually comes from a cognitivist tradition from psychology and educational psychology. There was two researchers back in the 1980s called Flower and Hayes, and they looked at writing strategies and composing processes that good and bad writers use. And they concluded that good writers use these set stages: pre-writing, planning, drafting, revising, and publishing as they write. And they recommended that teachers teach these processes to improve writing. So teachers from this orientation really believe that writing helps students with critical thinking and problem solving, and improving writing skills means improving the process that students go through when they write. And teaching composing processes has been shown to improve student use of successful writing strategies. So this method from this approach has really been found to be quite useful, especially for use of strategies. And now, again, cognitivist approaches are criticized for the same reasons that expressivist approaches are criticized, which is that there isn't a social focus of language in writing, and there isn't any discussion of genres and reader expectations. And also, because if you're focusing on writing processes, you're not focusing on language as much. So let's look at an activity that you can do. This might seem very familiar to you. This is a poster that details the writing process. And what you can do here is you can guide students through tasks that allow for pre-writing, tasks that allow for planning, tasks that allow for drafting. One of the things that good writers do is they pause after they write their first draft and read before they revise and edit and publish, right? So these are all things that cognitivist approach can help you do in your classroom. Okay, time for a question. How would you use expressivist or cognitivist approaches to teach second language writing? And we'll wait for some responses, either from the chat or poll EV.
There's the delay again. You're still on your previous slide in the webinar. Just so you know.
Am I?
Yeah,
okay,
that's fine. It's oh, here, coming in.
Coming through. Okay, so going through these composing processes as you work through one of the writing assignments that you're having your students do, yeah? Relating it to real life situations, so I think that's for expressivism and not for cognitivism. Mental mapping is a really great pre-writing strategy. Rubrics are really useful as you go through the drafting process. And someone says they like the cognitivist approach. Talking about writing probably would really be a great activity for expressivist writing. Asking students to keep a journal on their research, that's a really great idea. And in fact, I do that with my own research. I have a research journal. And then focusing on themes instead of genres, that's definitely from this school. And then we'll take this last one. Free writing accesses what students already know, and then so that you can focus on what needs to be improved. Okay, good. Thank you so much for responding. And let's go on to the next approach. And the next set of approaches are what we call socio-literate approaches. They focus on the social purpose and the communicative function for writing within the discipline or the field or the discourse community. And there are a couple of different traditions that belong to socio-literate approaches that are mainly organized by where the person is teaching. So, for example, genre studies is heavily for first language composition studies in the United States. And we call those approaches new rhetoric. People who are into systemic functional linguistics also come from a genre studies perspective. And then also the other sort of area of this is sort of EAP, English is for academic purposes and English for specific purposes. There's also a fair body of literature in genre studies as well. Another approach for this area is the content and language integrated learning approach, which is mainly for K through 12. So if you teach for high school, you might be aware of this approach. This is very much about teaching language skills and writing skills while teaching content. So this is kind of an integration of like science and writing together and ESL maybe. writing across the curriculum has the same goals as CLIL, except that it happens in university settings. So you might be taking a psychology class and then at the same time have a writing component as a part of that class. Socio-literate approaches are pretty current. They've been used since the 1980s up till now, and it's a very popular approach now. Some people are concerned that because they're focusing on genres, that there's sort of like a return to formulaic models for writing, like product approaches. Although I think that people who come from these approaches would probably say that they're not using formulaic models that are inauthentic, right? They're using authentic models that are actually used within the discourse community. The other criticism comes from critical literacy people who say that there really isn't, there's sort of an acceptance of the power structures inherent in academic communities and not any critical analysis of those things. And then the final sort of criticism is that focus on genre might preclude or prevent teachers from having much time for focusing on language. Maybe. So let's look a little bit at these approaches. So I told you genre studies are common in English for academics and specific purposes, systemic functional linguistics, and rhetorical genre studies. And teachers from this orientation believe that instruction should focus on the genres that second language writers need for their academic disciplines. So the entire curriculum would be centered around those things that the students need to be able to write, right? Of course, that's decided by the administration and faculty and not by students. So there may be a disconnect there depending, right? And that is actually one of the main criticisms of that approach. One thing that researchers found about using genre studies for teaching writing is that building genre knowledge has been implicated to improve disciplinary writing skills. So knowing, what types of writing you need to do in your field, knowing what types of language that is commonly used in that type of writing, knowing why you're writing that, all of those things will help you improve your disciplinary writing skills. So here's an example. This is a raising awareness activity. And basically what you would have students do is look at a authentic model for a genre and then answer questions about it based on rhetorical structure and language used, linguistic features used, and also the communicative purpose of that language and that type of message. Another type of socio-literate approach is the WAC and the CLIL, and both of these are common in K through 12, as I said, and in disciplinary courses at universities. And this is kind of a blending. So this is not where you have a separate course that's separate from your actual content course. These are blended courses. And they believe that writing instruction should happen actually in the disciplinary course itself. So you should be learning content with writing at the same time. This is a little bit different from genre studies because genre studies generally happen in a separate pull-out writing course, and then you're preparing for the discipline itself. And one of the main contributions here is that learning to write within your content class actually increases student motivation, and it might improve genre knowledge in a more profound way than genre studies. Okay, let's look at an example from here. This is from the Purdue Online Writing Lab, and they have lots of resources for people who are interested in writing across the curriculum. And this is an example from Writing and Engineering report, and there's actually a YouTube video here, and it shows you how to go through the process of writing an engineering report. So if you're in an engineering class and you're learning how to write a report from your professor or from an ESL teacher, you might find this resource very helpful. Okay, we have another question. So this is about socio-literate approaches. How would you use socio-literate approaches to teach second language writing?
Just hang on.
Yeah, I know there's always a little bit of a lag here. No problem.
Someone mentioned expressivist. I'm not really sure. Yeah, that's it. We're still answering the formal question.
Yeah, so expressivism would be more process approach, not socio-literate, yeah.
The slide has come up now.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's so strange. Okay, so somebody said maybe they're familiar with the CLIL approach, or so reading papers and producing essays in the genre, maybe. So one of the differences between a product approach and a genre studies approach is that product approaches are not, writing assignments are not really connected to anything. They're connected to rhetorical modes that are sort of generally useful for academics, whereas genre studies really focus on specific authentic texts that students will have to write in their field. So it's a little bit more contextualized, and it's a little bit more focused on reader expectations and what you actually will do when you are writing in your academic discipline. So I see some ideas here. Giving technical reports to students to write is very good. Comparing genres in an academic discipline would be really useful. So those are all really good answers. So I'd like to go on and, business English class would be really a good place to practice business writing skills. So let's go on to the next, the final set of approaches, which are post-process approaches. And those all sort of started at the end of the 1980s up until today. And these are all sort of a little bit more critical in nature. Okay, so let's look at post-process approaches. And there's two I'm going to talk about. That's collaborative pedagogies and also critical literacy. So let's talk a little bit about collaborative pedagogies first. So people who come from this orientation really believe that they believe in socio-cultural theory. So socio-cultural theory is from Vygotsky, 1986 or so. And Vygotsky was an educational psychologist who believed that people learned based on where they were at and then being helped by others, or so that their learning was socially mediated, and that learning was also scaffolded so that learners could start from where they're at and then build on that. So one of the big components of sociocultural theory is collaborative learning. And so people who come from collaborative pedagogy approach to second language writing really believe in collaborative learning and social mediation for improving writing skills. And they really believe that writing is communication. So the writer is actually communicating with readers and also with other texts that they've read. So there's this notion of intertextuality. And according to Bazerman, 2004, intertextuality describes the relation that each text has to other texts surrounding it. So this has a lot to do with textual borrowing. And, when we write research papers, we often use other sources. This would be an example of intertextuality. So one of the biggest contributions that collaborative pedagogies have had on second language writing is this idea of collaborative writing activities and supporting interlanguage development. So this idea that second language writers don't have to be perfect the first time they write. They can develop writing over time through collaboration and mediation by the teacher. And then the other thing is that this is a very flexible approach because it can be used with almost any of the other approaches that we've talked about, because it just talks really more about the teaching method than it does what writing to teach. Some critiques of this approach are that it doesn't really prepare second language writers to, working together, especially in different cultures, can be quite difficult. So one of the sort of problems with this type of approach is that teachers really have to prepare students to write together. And that can mean that they have to teach a lot of communication skills and technology to make that work effectively. And then the other problem is that when students work in groups, you're going to have students at different levels and students that contribute differently. So you'll really have to decide how you're going to assess collaborative writing. So some activities that you can do with collaborative writing is small group discussions about models and writing conventions. And also you can have students work on assignments together and offer each other feedbacks. The other thing that is very popular in collaborative writing pedagogies is student-teacher writing conferences and workshopping. So getting together to talk about one specific issue in writing and then working on it together. The last approach I want to talk about is a critical literacy approach. And I'm talking to people in Brazil, so you know this comes from Paulo Ferreire's book. And basically, critical literacy approaches really see writing in discourse communities as enacting power structures, social power structures, political power structures, and cultural power structures. And they really believe that EAP or English for academic purposes teachers who just teach these genres without talking about power and these kind of socioeconomic problems that might come up are really just accommodating or being accommodationist, and they're really not providing students with a voice for challenging and resisting ideologies that may not work for them, right? So they believe that one of the things that second language writers need to do is analyze socio-historical contexts of writing and challenge those educational practices from the position of being a member in the community. And one of the things that has been the biggest contribution for critical literacy is that it's very empowering for second language writers, and it really improves their sort of active participation in their community and their advocacy skills. However, there's been a number of criticisms of this approach. So a lot of people feel that it's impractical for novice members in discourse communities to challenge and resist the power structure in academic fields, especially if you are planning on writing for that field, that there's this sense that, second language writers need to learn how to do what is expected of them in the field, as opposed to challenging and resisting the sort of powerful structures inherent in academia. And the other issue is that maybe there isn't as much of a focus on language skills. So for a second language writing teacher, that might not be as helpful. So let's look at an example that I took from, there's a site called Tolerance, and they really look a lot at different types of critical literacy activities. And so this one is actually an analysis that then turns into a writing assignment, and it looks at fake news. So media consumers and creators, what are your rights and responsibilities? So really critically thinking about the types of news that you're getting and the types of media that you're reading and how to tell what's fake and what's real. And then, by critical analysis, then they can then write about these issues of race and class and gender and sexuality that happen in discourse communities. Good. So let's do our last sort of open-ended question here, which is how would you use collaborative pedagogies and critical literacy approaches to teach second language writing? While we're waiting for an answer on poll EV, is there any answers from the chat window, Luciana?
No, not at present, because we still have a delay. You're still in the previous slide.
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
So I can see an answer here that says debates, and debates are really great. Like, so if you can do some critical analysis of writing and then debate whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, that's a great idea. Meetings among native speakers and students, so maybe mixing, sort of more expert members from an academic discipline with their students, so that students can ask them questions about reader expectations and things like that. Good. So I hear some really good answers here about how to be critical about literacy. Writing about current topics, yeah. So yes, critical literacy has a lot of critical thinking and conversation. Analyzing Trump and Bolsonaro speeches. That seems like a really good research topic. So good. So we have lots of good ideas about what we can do to add into collaborative and critical literacy approaches in the second language writing classroom. Okay, let's go on. I have one more question for you. And that is, so we've talked about a number of different activities. We've talked about essay writing as a product approach, oriented approach. We've talked about free writing and journaling for expressivist activities. We've talked about using the writing process for cognitive activities. We've talked about genre analysis activities for genre studies. And we've talked about writing assignments for a specific discipline from like a writing across the curriculum perspective. We've talked about collaborative writing pedagogies. And we've also talked about being critically aware of academic genres. And so which activities have you used most often to teach second language writing in your own field and in your own context? So I have most of you saying essay writing. And none of you saying the critical awareness of academic genres. Okay, a lot of you are saying writing process, which is very common in college and university settings. Okay, so that's pretty much my presentation. I wanted to leave exactly 15 minutes of time to have a little discussion and answer questions. I have provided at the end here some references that I used in putting this presentation together. And also I have some teacher resources that I will post as well. These are some of my favorite sites for different approaches. So for example, the writing skills site is just a very good on American English for the U.S. State Department. It has a number of activities, and they're really just a good general source for teaching ESL writing. There's lots of different things you can do there. And they have a forum called the English Language Forum, and people write in with suggestions for teaching writing all the time. You can find things in there about voice and about composing processes, just about everything you could find there. Another really good source is the Read, Write, Think source from the International Literacy Association and the National Council for Teaching English. And this is a very good source for traditional rhetoric and process and collaborative writing resources. So this source is actually a very good source if you are teaching college composition in your context and you want to focus on essay writing. They have lots of stuff for this there. Also, the Conference on College Composition and Communication has a listserv for second language writing that if you're interested in collaborating more with other colleagues, this is a really good source for process orientations to teaching writing, because this is really for multilingual and first language college composition classes. There's a really good clearinghouse for writing across the curriculum from Colorado State University that has a lot of resources if you're really interested in writing across the curriculum. And then if you're interested in socio-literate approaches in general, you could check out the online writing lab at Purdue University. And that source that I said about looking at fake news actually came from the Teaching Tolerance website. And that's actually a really good resource for critical literacy lessons. And there's a number of lessons there that you could just use right away. So that's really all I had to talk about. Are there any questions for me?
We're collecting the questions, so let's give the audience a couple of seconds. But meanwhile, I have some questions coming up from the chat, directly from the chat. So the first question is, you mentioned that teaching writing is also related to teaching language, right, for second language speakers. And the question is, how do you combine both things?
That, you know, that can be really challenging, and it really depends on which approach you feel most suits your teaching style. With product approaches, it's kind of more seamlessly blended because you're doing a lot of analysis anyway. So you can just analyze the linguistic features of the models that you're looking at. Genre studies is the same thing. You're analyzing models anyway. You can analyze the linguistic features of the genre that you're looking at and then teach from that, you know, that particular type of grammar. One thing that I am now convinced of in my own teaching is that it's not useful to teach grammar without teaching writing at the same time. So I really try to, when I'm teaching writing, to whatever I'm teaching in writing, whether it's an essay or a summary or a paraphrase, I try to also teach the grammar that the students need in order to do that type of writing. So I try to connect the writing and the grammar that they're learning together. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, great. That was fine. That was fine. We have some other questions coming in, and I'll read a couple, and then you can pick and choose or comment on all of them. In your opinion, what is the best way to learn and become a good writer? And number two. Okay. So, okay, let's do this one first then. I think it's, in your opinion, what is the best way to learn and become a good writer?
So I really think it depends on your goals for writing. I actually really believe now that it's really important to do some needs analysis with your students at the beginning of the your course, so that you know what their goals are, because students are more motivated when they're learning things that they want to learn and they need to learn. And also, it's going to dictate what approaches you use. So if you're somebody who is trying to write for academic settings, then to become a good writer, you need to read academic articles and you need to practice writing that particular genre, right? If you're somebody who just wants to write professionally, like emails and that kind of thing, you might benefit more from collaborative writing so that you can learn how people write in those areas. Yeah. Okay. Another question?
Great. So another one is about your opinion on the maxim. On the maxim, only those who read a lot write well. Do you think this is true?
Whoever asked that question is a person after my own heart. I really believe that a lot of the problems that second language writers have with writing are from reading problems, especially when it comes to academic settings, when you're doing research writing and you're doing textual borrowing from sources, right? A lot of the mistakes I think that students make are because they're not reading appropriately, and that has to do with vocabulary and all kinds of other things. The other thing is that even in my own, so I'm English as a first language person, but even in my own learning how to write academically, I have to read a lot, and actually I borrow and use phrases from things that I've read. So I think that reading is a really important skill for learning how to write.
We have one more question. What's the best way to start practicing academic writing on your own? Or is it indispensable?
So ask the second part of the question again. I didn't hear it.
How can you practice or start writing academically on your own? What would be a good path? And are teachers indispensable on writing and teaching academic literacy? I think that if you're trying to learn how to write something on your own, the best approach for you would be a socio-literate approach, where you actually start gathering
examples of the genre that you're trying to learn how to write. Let's say you're trying to learn how to write a research article. Well, I would gather some really good examples of research articles, and then I would read them and figure out what type of, what are the moves, what are the sections, how is it organized, right? And then it is indispensable to have someone to give you feedback on your writing. I don't know that you need a teacher or you need to be in a class, but you definitely need feedback, especially if you're writing in a second language. It's really helpful to have either a native speaker or someone who is very, very informed about that type of writing that you're trying to do, give you feedback on writing. Even as a first language writer, I get all kinds of feedback when I write stuff. So it's really important that, you know, if you don't have a teacher, that you have somebody giving you feedback.
And we have time for a couple of more questions. The next one is about your experience teaching writing in high school. Is that correct? That's the person is asking. And how does high school or secondary education prepare students to write at university level in the United States?
So I don't actually have a lot of K through 12 experience. My only K through 12 experience is really at the start of my career when I was, I did my CELTA certificate in Spain, and I taught in a language school, and I taught, you know, high school and middle school classes there. So I don't have a lot of experience, but I do have, when I taught in Seattle, I have a lot of experience doing sort of developmental English. So these are classes where students are not quite ready to take English 101 or the English composition class that they need for their major. So they end up having to take sort of a pre-class where they're working on their writing skills so that they can then go to the academic class that they need. And that is because what they teach in high school English, at least in the United States, is very 5-paragraph oriented. And that's really only useful for the humanities. It's not really useful for social science writing or science writing at all. And so a lot of students in high school aren't as prepared, at least in the United States, for college writing. And I wonder if that's what you find in Brazil as well.
And how about the resources and support for writing that universities offer in the US? Could you talk about that based on your experience as a student and as a teacher?
So I went to Catholic school, and I had a very, very, very good high school English teacher who I didn't like at the time, but I am so grateful to her now because I didn't really struggle with college writing. But from teaching at colleges and universities here, I can say, you know, one of the things I see more and more universities, colleges and universities in the United States doing is offering a number of resources for multilingual students. So you have the writing centers. One of the problems with writing centers and writing tutors in the United States is that a lot of the tutors are either students themselves or don't have a background in English as a second language or second language writing. So they aren't as able to help students. So one of the ways that colleges and universities in the US have addressed that is by offering multilingual composition classes. So instead of taking your college credit course in English composition with first language writers, as an international student, you might be taking a multilingual English composition course that is still for credit, but it's specific with someone who is a second language writing expert. I teach classes like that. They also offer those classes in for graduate writing as well. And that's what I do at the College for Art and Design that I teach at. So I think one of the things that I'm finding in the US is that because we have so many multilingual students, colleges and universities are really trying to meet that need with more second language writing courses for both undergraduate and graduate students. Is it the same in Brazil?
Well, we have some support. We have a writing center. Professor Marilia can talk about this later on. And we have a lot of challenges in secondary education. And sometimes complain that they should have had more training in writing when they come to university where they're expected to write a lot. So it's very challenging and hard on the part of students. And as we are a country that also does not publish in, publishes a lot in our own language, but researchers and students are increasingly more required to publish in English. We have this English as a second language challenge that you just mentioned that take place in your universities as well.
So the complete sort of overtake of English in academic publications is a real problem everywhere in the world right now, and including in the United States, because we have so many multilingual researchers and graduate students, and they're having to write in a language that they're not as familiar with. It can be really challenging.
Yeah. We have one last question, which is about technology. How has technology helped people to write better? And this will be our last question. And people are mentioning assistants, grammar assistants, like writing assistants, like Grammarly as well. And any other technology you would like to talk about?
Yeah, so in later parts of the series, I'm really going to talk a lot about, like, especially next time and the next 3 sessions, I'll talk a lot about how you can teach writing online and use these kinds of activities. And I would say Grammarly is very useful. Although I will say there's a lot of concern about Grammarly and Turnitin, especially. So, the plagiarism checker Turnitin in the United States with second language researchers, because there's a feeling that, that students don't really develop fluency if they're using those kinds of tools, but they're also very helpful. I mean, I use Grammarly when I'm writing research papers, but I turn it off for everything else. So, because a lot of the suggestions are overly prescriptive. And one of the concerns I have is I really come from a more socio-literate approach. I also have some critical literacy things that I agree with, so I really am concerned that students are being asked to erase their accent in writing. So I really think that we should be allowing for accentedness in writing. If it's understandable, that's all that's necessary, right? Of course, you can argue that with really prescribed writing styles like research articles and engineering reports, there isn't room for accentedness. And that's something you can debate.
Great. So we have reached the end of our session. I would like to thank you very much, Jamila. And we know you are going to be with us for 4 more weeks. And I'll just like to tell the audience that we will be meeting as a webinar session every Friday of July. So our next session is on July 10th, Backward Design in the Teaching of Academic English. And then we're having a session on the 17th, and the 24th, and the 31st. And Jamila will be addressing a topic on academic writing on every new week. So we're looking forward to having you with us. The questions that you may have and that may have gone unanswered, please send them to aucani.idiomas@usp.br, aucani.idiomas@usp.br. And I'd like to thank Professor Valmore, Professor Laura Izaha from Aucani, and Madalena Young-Smith, Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy. And a special thanks to Jamila, and see you all next week. Thank you so very much, and enjoy your afternoon.
Okay, and if you could just go to the poll here and fill out the survey for me, that would be really great information for me for the next time that we meet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamila.
Bye-bye, Jamila. Thanks, Luciana.
Bye, Professor Laura. Bye, Professor Valmore. Thank you.
Bye, thank you very much. See you.
Thank you all. Okay, so see you in a minute.
Okay, see you in the next one.
Okay.
All right, bye.